This goes out to a bunch of college students down in Texas. At the end of last month, I finally put up a MySpace page, and within a week I had a bunch of emails asking me about a story I wrote called Newsworld. And so I'm going to do my best to cobble out some answers to the questions I was sent. Well, this one seems like the place to start. This comes from Andy. I'm a Texas State student who is doing an introduction of you and your story in Newsworld for an English project. I was wondering if you could get back to me and tell me a little about your childhood, where you went to school, and some basic meanings of your story. Thank you so much for your time.
These, of course, are pictures of my parents. They both worked at the high school, teaching the learning disabled, which was why, when I was young, they pushed me towards advanced placement classes and foreign languages they taught in preschool and kindergarten. I spent my early years in Covina, California, which is part of Los Angeles, but then when I was 6, I moved to Santa Barbara, California. That's me there on top with the classic bowl cut and the green striped shirt, and right below me is one of my close friends, Jerry Compton. But beyond close friends, it's strange what I remember about my elementary school friends. Alan Fitch, one of the nicest kids, had a metal plate in his head, which he let us tap with our fingers. Kelly Contrelli liked to pick fights with boys. Kevin Hoosier fell out of a tree and broke his leg, and Sandy Chan started in on algebra, while the rest of us were still muddling through long division. I decorated my room with posters of wild animals, and on TV I loved Happy Days so much that I repeatedly imitated the Fonz. My report card that year shows that in PE I studied Little Red and something called Goof Kick, while in science I studied energy and career education, which I remember specifically involved making change. One teacher wrote, "Todd is a creative student who has some sparkling ideas but needs to improve in his ability to express himself in his written work." But in terms of Newsworld, there's this. When I was 9, the government assembled the American Freedom Train, a traveling museum exhibition that moved from city to city. Dressed in jackets, my family waited for 2 hours to visit the string of boxcars that made up the Freedom Train. We saw the Liberty Bell and one copy of the Declaration of Independence. But beyond the actual historic artifacts, we saw mannequins dressed to resemble Civil War soldiers, mannequins arranged into a colonial diorama, mannequins representing the Roosevelt era and the 1950s. Through a projection system, these mannequins appeared to talk and look at visitors as they passed on a moving walkway. The visit stayed with me, and was one of the early experiences that led a couple decades later to the invention of Newsworld in my stories.
Here's another one. A partner and myself are giving a presentation on your story, Newsworld. Can you by chance let me know why you decided to write this piece?
Well, I suppose it's easier for me to explain the Newsworld stories in terms of another story in the same collection, Columbine the Musical. A few months after the shootings, I knew I wanted to write a story based on the obsessive and frankly disturbing media interest in the Columbine shootings. I understood that the news media was beginning to treat the Columbine shootings as a type of news entertainment, creating coverage that better resembled a TV miniseries than traditional journalism. Since the O.J. Simpson trial, American news media had been consciously assembling their features as entertainment stories to attract a larger audience. Journalism reveals and investigates, while entertainment makes viewers want to know what happens next. Columbine was just the latest news miniseries in a stream of such stories that would include the Scott Peterson trial, the D.C. sniper, and the murder of John Benet Ramsey. But in my own story, I also wanted to respect the events surrounding the Columbine incident. So in August of 1999, I visited the Columbine area for 3 days, spending time in the state archives and working with a local library clipping service to better understand the events as they appeared locally. I felt I also needed to visit the school itself, but as the school year was already in session, I decided to visit it after hours, long after even football practice had ended. I drove into the parking lot around 1 a.m. with a small digital camera. Alone, I walked past the library, the cafeteria, the upper classrooms the entire time, trying to focus on the reality of the place, its connection to those lives lost. On each window was a yellow sign prohibiting photography. I spent an hour there believing the cops would probably find me before I returned to my rental car and drove to my hotel. It took me another year to write Columbine the musical, which became the first of many stories I wrote to examine America's connection to news, entertainment, and popular culture. Other stories would include Wrestling Al Gore, stories about Christopher Reeve and the cast of The Real World, and of course the 2 stories set at the imaginary theme park Newsworld, where all the rides are inspired by news headlines.
Here's a note from Esther. I wanted to know what inspired you to write about this topic. Prior to 9/11, what was the young men's relationship to Newsworld? In the book Newsworld, there are actually 2 stories about the imaginary theme park called Newsworld. It's usually the shorter of the 2 stories that's anthologized into textbooks, and so I'm pretty sure that's the story you're using for your presentation. In that story, there's a group of boys who have grown up in Atlanta around this theme park. They're familiar with the world where news has become entertainment. At that theme park, there are rides fashioned after contemporary headlines, such as O.J.'s Bronco the Ride and the Vietnam Experience. For these boys, they have grown up in a world where news has always been a type of entertainment, where you tune in to the evening news to see what happened next. And so, through parody, I've taken what has actually been happening in media news, where it's become a type of ongoing miniseries or an ongoing type of news entertainment coverage, and expanded it. Parody takes one cultural element and expands it to the point where through humor a story can make interesting commentary on it. And so the Newsworld theme park, is an extrapolation, is an expansion of what has really been going on in American TV journalism. But now, instead of having the entertainment on TV, it's expanded to the point where there are rides, where there are attractions based on these news stories. These boys don't know how to relate to world events that they see on TV because they have been damaged by this news entertainment culture. And so for them, in the world of this story, they're looking for a way to genuinely relate to the tragedies of 9/11. They're looking for an honest, emotional reaction to the images that they've seen on TV, but they don't yet have the skills or the means to connect these types of televised images with reality. They sense that what they've seen this time on TV is going to change their future, is going to change the emotional landscape of their nation, but they don't yet know how to absorb these impressions that they've been given. Here's another one. I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation on you, and I was wondering if you could send me some pictures and any information you would like for me to include.
Well, very briefly, I live in Santa Barbara County, California, and I teach at Cal Poly University. I met my wife in a bar, and 7 years later we managed to get married in Tallahassee, Florida. I learned to write mainly through reading and also by attending graduate writing programs. I went to Oregon State University, University of California at Irvine, and Florida State University, where I got a PhD. This is a photo of me and Thomas Keneally, one of my advisors. After college, I spent some time in Australia. I taught high school there, I worked at a nursery there, and collectively these experiences became the basis for my first novel, which is called The Australia Stories.
Okay, well that's about it. That's all I got. Hope you found it useful. Good luck in this class, and good luck in college.